Greetings and good Wednesday morning, this 14th of December, 2022, third decade of the 21st century. Third decade of the 21st century. If you're new to my channel, I always bring that up because I say it as a juxtaposition or a contrast by comparing what we're talking about today, what's popular, what's in the zeitgeist, and where people predicted us to be, where people had thought we would have evolved to. So, a couple of things I want to talk about since they're trending and they're popular. First one is the Elon Musk Twitter file release, what have you. Before I comment on that, I want to address a couple of things up front. First and foremost, the most difficult thing to overcome is bias and interpersonal bias. What I will tell you is this: if you're new to my channel, you're not familiar with me or what I try to discuss, I am very much against the Democratic Party. My reasons for that go back historically. And admittedly, it has produced a significant bias towards the Democratic Party. Do I probably know some Democrats? Sure. Are they probably good people? Sure. Do they represent the Democratic Party of old? Probably not. Do modern Democrats represent the Democratic Party of old? Most likely not. But do they still represent the Democratic Party, and does the Democratic Party represent an extreme anti-American agenda? In this humble man's opinion, yes it does. If anybody wants to respond with a question as to why am I anti-Democrat, I have a video from my archive I can share, or I can also just answer that. One of the favorite things I like to do is for anybody who responds to my videos, I like to, especially if you type a comment, I will read, react, and respond to your comments. So, why am I also extending this preamble before I comment on Brittany Griner and Elon Musk? Is first and foremost, my bias towards the Democratic Party is difficult for me to be 100% objective, even though I struggle and try to be as objective as humanly possible. With that in mind, I'm well aware of my bias. Where this becomes difficult is for equal and opposite people that share the same bias. For people that have somehow built an unnatural disdain towards the Republican Party. If I was to be accused of having an unnatural disdain for the Democratic Party, it's plausible to suggest that there are others who have an equal and opposite irrational disdain towards the Republican Party. My limited understanding and my hypothesis, my guesstimation is that at some point in time the Republican Party decided to partner up with the 700 Club. They decided to partner up with religious figures, and they tried to make their party more representative of the foundational principles of Christianity, specifically with topics that oppose Christianity, or specifically Christianity opposes. Interestingly enough, the gentleman who lives across the cul-de-sac from me is a minister. The house is owned by his church. Since the church bought the house, I believe he's the second minister to occupy it. And quite frankly, one of the things he told me is the Bible addresses homosexuality as a sin, and therefore, because of his dedication to his faith, he has to recognize it as a sin. It's not much of a conflict, but at the same time it's potentially a conflict where, as a Christian, he also recognizes, accepts, and loves them, but accepts and loves the LGBTQ alphabet mafia as sinners, and recognizes them as sinners and can recognize their good qualities while at the same time sinning against the Bible. That is where my personal vendetta, if you will, is nobody seems to want to reconcile the fact that the Bible was written by men, exclusively by men. If there were women, like some people suggest that Mary Magdalene had her own gospels that she wanted to include in the Bible, but back then, men ruled the world and women did not. So therefore, she and a handful of other Gospels were excluded. Historically it's accurate. The Council of Nicaea, as ordained by Emperor Constantine to begin the process of converting the Roman Empire into Christianity, where they merged together certain pagan holidays and converted them to Christian holidays, like the celebration of the winter solstice. Anyways, they agreed upon what Gospels would become part of the Christian Bible and what wouldn't. And this all took place after the death of Jesus Christ, who most scholars believe was a real man that walked the earth. And I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm trying to make a point. Basically, I find many flaws with the Christian religions, possibly even with Judaism, and possibly even with Islam. They were all written by men. They're very male dominant. They're also very culturally appropriate for the culture at the time. I mean, quite frankly, Emperor Constantine brought together a group of individuals to determine which Gospels are agreed upon that go into the Bible. Therefore, they excluded certain Gospels. All right, so it's basically a bunch of people determining what was the real, teachings of Jesus. What was the intention. These are people deciding that for themselves, men deciding it for themselves. And I can guarantee you, at that point in time, if you could travel back in time, they were extremely concerned about the socio-political aspects and the cultural aspects. So Christianity was more than likely morphed around the culture at the time, just like Islam was morphed around the culture at the time, and perhaps back then Judaism was morphed around the culture at the time. And some people tend to forget that Judaism was so heavily persecuted against because pagans ruled the world, and Judaism was the first to believe in a singular God and no other God but God. But I digress. So you start with Democrats and Republicans, and then when some people aren't 100% in love with those labels, you start to progress down, like liberal, conservative, progressive, I don't know. I mean, the list could go on. I had the list written down. I forgot to bring it with me. My apologies for that. But within the Republican Party, you have what you might call subgenres, like the conservatives, right-wingers, some labels that are applied by others. Like others will say, oh, Nazi fascists and whatnot, and then, oh, libtards, left-wingers, BLM, Antifa, whatever. So at the end of the day, I understand if I can have what might be an unnatural bias towards the Democratic Party, others can have an unnatural bias towards the Republican Party, at which point I state, how do we move forward? That being said, I'm not a registered Republican. I'm probably more of an independent. Unfortunately, and I've said this numerous times, in the absence of a solid third-party choice, in the absence of a really, really good third-party choice, I tend to vote Republican. And there's also rumor that voting for an other than Republican candidate is basically a win for the Democratic Party, which I despise. But that's not the point of this lecture, so to speak. The reason I bring all of this up, the reason I went on that tirade, that tangent, when it involves Brittany Griner and Elon Musk, is I like to point out hypocrisy. I like to point out how the major media sources, I mean, I could probably split my screen and show you Yahoo, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, Good Morning America. They're all almost entirely a propaganda arm for the Democratic Party and or liberals, progressives, the left. Everything is heavily skewed. It's propaganda. The rare exception being Fox News. So of course Fox News gets lambasted. I mean, my God, Ryan Reynolds can't even make a movie without saying "Pump the hate brakes, Fox and friends." What's that all about? Anyways, I digress. Why do I say all this? So first and foremost, Elon Musk bought Twitter, took over Twitter, and he's been releasing evidence of Twitter working together with various forms of government, potentially three-letter agencies, to stifle the free speech, the communications of those that these agencies or political figures disagreed with, and that the individual Twitter employees socio-politically disagreed with, so that only one message was getting out there. And because apparently these people didn't think far enough ahead that somebody like Elon could buy the company, or that their communications that were in typed form, written form, were being saved, that, you know, they could be exposed. Elon is exposing it. Granted, people who have a heavy bias towards the right are going to deny, deflect, wag the dog, what have you. In which case, that's where I brought all that stuff up, because of that cycle, right? It's my opinion the overwhelming majority of media outlets, to include social media, tech media, is belligerently on the left, basically posing as a propaganda arm. I mean, even YouTube and Google, all right, which I know I'm on YouTube, but I'm not popular enough to get canceled. So I just find it amazing, because where do we stop this cycle? When is enough enough? If I claim, or if anybody else, if somebody more popular than me, if somebody with more production value than me, with more people doing research, can show and quote examples of hypocrisy, if they can show and quote examples of interference, stifling free speech, election tampering, I know that there's people who are vehemently against the right that will come out and say, well, who's to say it doesn't happen on the right? Who's to say that the right doesn't do this? Or, hey, what about this, that, or the other, you know, intimidation? And it's like, well, is it really intimidation to demand proof of citizenship via the form of an ID to prove that you're an adult, you're old enough to vote, you're registered to vote, and you're an American citizen, thus preventing non-American citizens from voting in our elections? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Is there anything wrong with requesting that the elections are safe and secure, and that you don't introduce any possibility for tampering, whether mail-in ballots, what have you? Is it wrong to suggest that somebody running for a position of authority, already sitting in a position of authority, remove themselves from that position in order to run? Case in point, the woman, I forget her name, the woman in Arizona who won the governor's race, or allegedly won the governor's race, was also directly responsible for supervising and managing the election in Arizona. And nobody sees a problem with this? The reason I bring it up is because for those who oppose my line of thinking, for those who oppose my opinions and beliefs, for those who are steadfast and biased against the right, they will actively seek out examples, or make an attempt to seek out examples of the exact same thing happening on the right. And I'll just go ahead and cut you off at the knees. I think the only real example you'll have is Nixon. All right, I'm not saying that the Republican Party is not flawed. I'm not saying the Republican Party is not free of impropriety. I mean, Nixon was obviously either involved or uninvolved, but you know, it severely damaged his presidency and potentially his legacy. So let's get back on track. Elon Musk, relatively an independent thinker, but in recent days, weeks, and months has found himself more centered to right of center. And for years, he was not a Republican sympathizer, Republican voter. You know, he was always more progressive, more liberal, you know, hey for the little guy, which the Democratic Party seems to think that they own the little guy, the other than heterosexual whites, which by itself is a very, very divisive concept, but I'll move forward. When you dissect it at its core, let's think about that for 1 second. Elon Musk is attempting to preserve free speech and the freedom to communicate, all right, and the freedom of hypocrisy, you know, from hypocrisy and all the negative things that are coming out of these file dumps. And of course, Go figure, right? Now we're freeing Brittany Griner, which is like, hey, look over here. Don't look at what Elon's doing. Look over here. Look at the Brittany Griner thing. And I'll get to that in a second. If you close your eyes for a minute and you dissect it, you have an African-American billionaire purchasing an American company, overhauling it and cleaning it so it more directly represents the principles and foundations of America. An African-American had to purchase an American company to clean it up and reset it back to a company that more directly represents the ideals and foundations of America, i.e. free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of communication, all right, removing hypocrisy, all right, removing foul play, exposing hypocrisy, exposing foul play. That's really all he's doing. And the fact that people are in such denial, it goes to show that we've reached a point where our own bias is overwhelming our rational thought and our rational objectivity. I freely admit to having bias against the Democratic Party, but I try like hell to be as rational and as objective as I can be within reason. I don't know if it was done by design, if it was purely coincidental timing, but we did a prisoner exchange for Brittany Griner. And I was trying to look for it on YouTube, and of course YouTube may be purposely filtering it out, but Steven Crowder on yesterday's live stream showed a video of a Russian news channel, a Russian talk show, something of that nature, where a woman, a Russian anchor, possibly a news anchor, and I have to assume that the subtitles were accurate, basically said, we were attempting to trade for Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner with this higher level, higher priced individual, the merchant of death that we had, Victor Bout. And this Russian news anchor basically said, in her opinion, part of the reason Paul Whelan was not released is A, he's a military service member or former military service member. B, he's a heterosexual white male. Brittany Griner is none of those things. For all intents and purposes, everything I've heard about Brittany Griner, other than her basketball talents, is she's vehemently anti-American. She believes that America is no better than it was in the 60s and earlier, you know, when southern states practiced Jim Crow and segregation and so on and so forth. She believes that America is foundationally rooted in racism towards blacks, in hatred towards non-heterosexuals, and this is everything I've heard. Obviously I don't know Brittany Griner. I haven't had a chance to speak to her. She was arrested for having cannabis oil cartridges for a vape pen. I don't know the league she played for. I don't know if it was the WNBA or some other European league. But I know whenever I traveled, we were always given some sort of a safety warning, like, hey, do this, don't do this, don't do that. These things are considered illegal, where in the United States they're not illegal. So the way it's being presented is as in she knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to get away with it, and she got caught, and she needs to suffer the consequences of her actions. I don't know if any of that's true. All right, usually when it comes to anything, there's three sides to every story. There's yours, there's mine, and then somewhere in between is the truth. Paul Whelan, I don't know him. I don't know his service history. I don't know what his DD-214 looks like. I don't know what his pros and cons look like, his counseling sheets, his fitness reports, if he received fitness reports. I don't know if he was a good Marine, outstanding Marine, or a basic paycheck earner. You know, somebody who came to work every day, did their job, got paid, you know, didn't exceed, didn't rise above, didn't fall below, just maintain the standard. I don't know. I don't know him. And that's about as rational and as objective as I can be. Other than that, he earned the title Marine just like I did. I don't know the circumstances of what he was doing in Russia and why he was picked up for espionage, other than perhaps being an American. or a former American service member. But I find it interesting that we have all this stuff going on with Elon, and then all of a sudden, whether coincidence or by design, Brittany Griner gets released, where based on what's being put out in the media, if you compare the quality of the individual, Brittany Griner does not maintain the same quality of character as Paul Whelan does. And this is based on information being put out there. And I haven't seen a whole lot of commentary on it by anybody other than obviously right-leaning sources. So I don't know if any liberal progressive sources are discussing this as a bad deal. If they're discussing this as though, you know, Brittany Griner kind of, you know, put herself in her own bed that she needs to lie in, I don't know. And I'm trying to say this as objectively as possible, because if all these things are true, if Brittany Griner does not like America, if she hates America, if she thinks America is belligerently racist and all of these things, you know, she's very anti-American, and that's why rumor has it she left the WNBA to go play in the European League, whatever the case may be. I also don't know much about Paul Whelan. I don't know the quality and content of his character. I'm not suggesting he has a lack thereof. I'm just saying, if you believe in some of these mythical things where if the two of them died and were sent to wherever, you know, some pagans believed that when you die, your soul was weighed and measured based on your deeds, and if you came out as a good person, you progressed on to heaven. If you came out as a bad person, you progressed on to hell, or whatever that version was. I don't know if it's a fair and accurate comparison that Paul Whelan is a better person than Brittany, if the quality and content of his character is higher than Brittany Griner's. I don't know if the quality and content of Brittany Griner's character is positive. All I know is what I've heard. I just find it uniquely interesting that Elon Musk is exposing all of this information that was basically in the Twitter vault, and for all intents and purposes, it's pretty damning and damaging. And now all of a sudden, Brittany Griner is being released. I don't know what her political value is. I don't know what her overall value to the country is, other than what I've heard. She left the country to go play in the European League, and she's all kinds of upset and pissed off about the WNBA, and I don't know. I have heard less than positive things about Brittany Griner. I've heard positive things about Paul Whelan. I don't know how much of it is true. I'm trying like hell to be objective, but I'd like to hear other people's opinions. All right? Whether you're pro-Brittany, anti-Brittany, pro-Paul, anti-Paul, I'd love to hear anybody's opinions on the subject, because I think we as individuals need to communicate amongst ourselves and formulate our own opinions and not rely on, you know, internet-based forms of communication or legacy forms of media to tell us what to think. And that's all I'm really trying to do here. Is these are popular stories. What do we think? What do we as desperately rational people, ugh. What do we as people who try desperately to be rational really think? Do we think this is a wag the dog? Do we think this is a, hey, deflect the attention over here to take the attention away from what Elon Musk is exposing? Is Elon Musk really that bad of a person? Why are all these agencies and outlets trying really, really hard to damage him? Why are celebrities trying to speak negatively about him when they all own Teslas? All he's doing is basically unclogging, all right, he's unclogging the pathway to free speech and exposing hypocrisy and inappropriate behavior by the previous employees and ownership of Twitter and some of their interactions with government entities. All right? You'd think that if it happened on the right, you'd be equally as interested. You'd think that if the right was doing the same thing with another social media platform, that you'd be equally as interested, and you'd think that these celebrities would tout that individual as a hero. But instead, because it goes against their socio-political bias, Elon is now all of a sudden the Antichrist, the devil, this horrifically bad person. I mean, my God, he got booted at Dave Chappelle comedy show. How ignorant, self-absorbed, self-involved, close-minded, echo chamber screaming do you have to be to not see that this is nothing more than exposing bad stuff. But that's my 2 cents. I would much rather hear from anybody else out there what you think. All right? But do me a favor. Also let me know if it's your opinion versus if you're going to say, well, this is proof of Elon, doing... If you want to turn this into some college level sort of interaction where you have to cite resources, trust me, I can absolutely do that. But all I'm trying to do is communicate, have communications, increase communications. Like, hey, media outlets are saying this. What do we as real people think? And if you do, I greatly appreciate it. I will read, react, and respond to your comments. So if you do leave a comment, it's greatly appreciated. You're awesome. Till next time. Whoop, gotta stop you.